My name is Kenneth Lukwago Anderson, and today I have a panel of 4, and our topic will be looking at the major events of the week. We will be looking at the Dr. Besigye situation and the fresh charges that he faces now. Today, Dr. Besigye and his co-accused, Haji Obedi Lutale and UPDF Captain Dennis Ola, were charged afresh before Nakawa Magistrates Court with treason. It's alleged that they plan to overthrow the government of Uganda based almost on similar circumstances as explained before the defunct military court-martial. This included holding meetings in Uganda, online and abroad, to solicit for firearms. They also apparently planned to train a number of people in Kisumu in Kenya as part of that wider plan. The 3 were remanded to Luzira until the 7th of next month when they return for mention. Following this development, Dr. Kizza Besigye has called off his hunger strike. His lawyers explained that he had gone on hunger strike because he believed that he was being held illegally in Luzira. Now that they have taken him to court of competent jurisdiction, he has decided to end the hunger strike. He was delivered in court in a wheelchair, and his lawyers are planning to apply for bail from the High Court for him to actually get treatment, because that particular application was rejected by the magistrate, who said actually that she didn't have jurisdiction because they had been charged with a capital offense. We know very well President Yoweri Museveni this particular week wrote about this situation, and he insisted that instead of Ugandans pushing for the unconditional release of Dr. Kizza Besigye, they should be asking why was he arrested in the first place, and probably campaigning that he should get a speedy trial. He actually said that the illness that people were talking about was as a result of the hunger strike, which he described as a consequence of unprincipled blackmail. The opposition had issued a 48-hour ultimatum to government to release Dr. Kizza Besigye or carry out demonstrations. We know the NRM caucus has been meeting in Entebbe to look at the possible amendment of the UPDF Act with a view of returning the military court-martial. President Yoweri Museveni and the CDF General Muhoozi Kainerugaba have been very vocal on this particular court, saying it's important that it's reinstated because it has contributed to peace and justice in some parts of this country. MPs have however been told they should not come up with a law that sort of defeats the ruling of the Supreme Court. We'll be looking at that issue in detail. Also, our next topic will be the fresh allegations of abductions. The National Unity Platform party has raised fears about fresh abductions. It has reported that members of its electoral management committee and its national mobilizer, Fred Nyanzi, had been missing. They all showed up. The members of the election monitoring management committee showed up yesterday night, and then Fred Nyanzi has actually appeared today. These people have since explained what the security people were looking for, based on the brief that they provided the media. Today, the headquarters of this political party in Kavule was closely watched by security, and the leader of that political party, Robert Kyagulanyi, went on social media to say that some armed people in civilian clothes were seen patrolling his compound. And on social media, we've seen a number of other NUP leaders actually writing about what could be happening following the fact that the security personnel have been following them closely. We'll be discussing these issues in detail. Like I said, I have a panel of 4. The 2 are already here in studio. Let me introduce Mr. Benjamin Katana. He's a lawyer at the National Unity Platform Party, where he's also the national treasurer. Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. It's always a great pleasure. My appreciation to Radio 1 for the opportunity to speak to the people of Uganda. My greetings to the listeners of this program.
Thank you so much for joining us. Ms. Perry Aritua, Executive Director, Women Democracy Network, Uganda chapter, Panel on Governance and Human Rights Issues. Good evening, Perry. Thank you very much for also making time to be with us here today.
Thank you, Kenneth. Good evening, listeners and viewers and my fellow panelists.
The 2 other panelists on their way. When they reach here, I will actually introduce them. Gentlemen and lady, let's begin with this situation of Dr. Kizza Besigye to try and understand where it's likely to go. I know it's a matter that is now in court, so we might not discuss deeper looking at issues to do with the evidence. But I'll begin with you, Benjamin Katana. You are part of the opposition, and it seems the opposition has been galvanized towards securing the release of Dr. Kizza Besigye. There's been a push to have him released for health reasons. That one has not been able to be achieved, but we have seen finally government, having him charged in civilian courts.
Yeah, I think what is happening now is what has been happening for very many years in Uganda. That we have a situation where the incumbent has hijacked the state apparatus and is using it to do politics for personal benefit. And most especially, the security infrastructure. That what the charges being brought against Dr. Besigye today are similar to the charges that were brought against him many years ago. You remember when he was being charged with treason, the dramatic trial where it emerged that the case was a mere fabrication. And when the establishment was caught lying, they were embarrassed and dropped it. You remember some time back, I think around 2017, 2018, when the president of NUP today was charged with unlawful possession of firearms, and eventually it emerged that these charges were fabricated. So the script is the old script that Museveni has relied on to deal with his opponents. It has not started with today. It did not start 5 years ago, but that has been his approach ever since he shot himself to power. He has co-opted state institutions whose responsibility should be to protect and secure the people of Uganda, and now they are being used as a weapon to deal with political opponents, which is unfortunate, which is unconstitutional, and a reminder of the dark days of our history.
Well, we are not looking at Dr. Besigye as the only opposition leader. Why him? Why not Robert Kyagulanyi?
He has faced similar charges, ridiculous charges before, and you cannot be sure that similar ridiculous charges will not be brought against him today or tomorrow. As we speak now, we have masked and armed to teeth security men ransacking the offices of NUP at Kavule and the school at Kamocha. We have had a number of our leaders abducted in a manner reminiscent of the Pandagari days. The other day, the Secretary for Mobilization, in broad daylight, was abducted. He has been held incommunicado and released and dropped near his home today. And he was picked in broad daylight. And so, the treatment being that Dr. Besigye is being subjected to is not isolated. It is the same treatment that he has received for the last close 3 decades. It is the treatment that the Red Kaira was subjected to. It is the treatment that Kyagulanyi has been subjected to. It is the treatment that any challenger to Museveni who poses a threat to his hold on power will face, because that is his known script of dealing with opponents. He does not compete with them politically. He uses violence with the assistance of the state apparatus to disadvantage his opponents.
All right. Perry, you've followed closely this issue, Dr. Kizza Besigye, and hearing Katana saying there's some element of history to it, but let's look at the current circumstances. His arrest comes a few months or a year to the next elections, and like you heard from Katana, people are looking at it from a political angle. But the government says, if somebody is involved in criminal activities, much as they are an opposition leader or political leader of any kind, they can still be prosecuted.
You see, Uganda does not exist in an island. On 21st October 1986, Uganda actually signed the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And actually, that's the date of ratification, because it signed in May and it ratified the charter in October. 1986, and I think that's just a few months after the NRM came to power. Now, within that charter, we have principles and guidelines on the right to a fair trial and legal assistance. The guidelines were passed in 2003. What is cardinal, and why I'm quoting this, is because when you ratify any charter or any convention, you have obligations. And I think that's why the newly elected AU
chairperson of the AU Commission
issued a statement. Because within that particular guidelines, there's one which I think it's G, which is very clear on the right of civilians not to be tried before military courts. And it stipulates that the only purpose of military courts shall be to determine offenses of a purely military nature committed by military personnel. And that military courts should not in any circumstance whatsoever have jurisdiction over civilians. It's very clear on that. And I think that's why the Supreme Court had no option, because there's an offense called treason. So if you're saying someone has committed that offense, we have a penal code which is clear. And you see, you cannot make statements on a case when you have not had an opportunity to a fair trial. And there are principles for a fair trial. And I think that's why most Ugandans are in uproar, because you cannot make a constitution, which is your contract with citizens, and you decide to operate outside the constitution, because that leads to anarchy. So the expectation of citizens is that the government must protect and promote rights. If you're saying that every Ugandan, a civilian, can get justice through the courts of law, you need to respect that. These particular guidelines also say that states must, and here they use must, ensure that no one shall be subject to arbitrary arrest or detention, and that arrest, detention, or imprisonment shall only be carried out strictly in accordance with the law and by competent officials or persons authorized for that purpose. So, and you see, when any provision which uses the word shall, that means it's mandatory. So you can't disappear people, you can't arrest people outside the law. So we must adhere to what we have decided through our constitution. And that is why whatever, even if the state alleges that someone commits an offense, you must follow due process. That is why we have our constitution. That's why we have laws. So once you operate outside those laws, outside the constitution, you are actually breeding room for anarchy. And for me, I think that for many of us who are lawyers, but who are also citizens of this country, it's what creates the frustration that why don't you use the laws? You have them. We agreed that this is how the due process shall be, but you operate outside. So you cannot expect public opinion to support you, because if someone has committed an offense, our constitution is clear in terms of what must happen, that you can't disappear people, you can't arbitrarily arrest people. So for me, that's my take. In terms of how they have handled this, how government has handled this issue, I think they have shot themselves in the foot. Because even if you have a case, you have already biased public opinion because of the processes that have led to the current detention of Kizza Besigye and also other political prisoners.
All right, let's go to Dr. James Tweheyo. Your quick take. What has been the feeling about this particular issue? I know you're coming from the caucus, and probably there have been some whispers around the manner in which Dr. Besigye has been handled this time around.
First of all, as a human being, it is important to have sympathy for anybody who has a problem. And the major problem Dr. Kizza Besigye has is the ear health. So in the first place, I sympathize with him for having the ear health. However, like any other citizen, when somebody is suspected, that person should rightly be subjected to the courts of law, the competent courts of law, to use a better word, and have justice dispensed, either for or against him. And this is exactly what is happening, regardless of the flaws. when you see the trend the things are taking, ordinarily there are arguments that Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye has been treated unfairly in terms of subjecting him to justice. But none of us is saying Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye is innocent. It is only the courts of law which can prove him innocent against his accusers. So if we sit here and say, no, the man is innocent because previously there have been other cases against him and they have not been proved, then we would be acting as a court of law, which in my view is not right. It would be misleading.
But the script seems to be the same, like
Yes,
Mr. Katana said.
Appear to be
Around
it
around
may
election
appear to
time,
be as
things
Mr.
like this.
Katana says, but it may also not be true. So we don't. I don't want to come to conclusion. Perhaps the only one thing I should say at the moment is that yes, Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye, the court ordered, not necessarily for Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye alone, but for all those who are subjected to the court martial and who are civilians in that case, whether their cases are related to the military or not. The court ruled that their cases should be transferred to the civil courts. The transfer process and time, of course, could not be mentioned. I would have wished the transfer was prompt. Now that the case has been mentioned, brought to case formation, I want to believe that the process of transfer is in place.
Do you think this was a transfer? Because when I look at the charges which were read in the military courts and the charges read today in Nekawa, they seem to be a little bit different.
Yes, they could be different.
What did they transfer?
According to court, by the way,
they only transferred the suspect.
They are mentioning that they have not got any file that is transferred from the military court martial to the civil court. However, at least at the moment, the court martial has not gone ahead to go into the case of Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye, meaning that in a way they have complied. It is assumed that they have complied to the ruling of the
Supreme Court.
So, if the civil court now has brought Kizza Besigye before it, and as has been demanded by the Kizza Besigye's legal team, my prayer would be, let his case be handled, let it be concluded, let him be proved innocent or guilty, and then beyond that, let him also have his liberties either given and his rights provided for. He's entitled to health, to life first of all. He's entitled to life. He's entitled to treatment like any other person. Like you and me would really wish, if we were sick, to be treated. Of course, part of his problem at the moment was his hunger strike. I'm glad that he has also called it off, as I have heard. But then it is also right for him to have the treatment, to see the medical doctors of his choice, so that at the end of the day, government is not seen as simply a bully taking advantage of the situation. I may also hasten to mention that in this situation, usually the politics are at play, and you cannot rule it out. Both the politics of the victors and the politics of the losers. Anybody who is politically active would like to take advantage of this situation. And it is normal and healthy, whether they are in the opposition. If the opposition thinks this is their winning goal, they would take advantage. But also, if you are in the government, you must take responsibility and know that regardless of the criticisms, you need to do what is right for the protection of this country.
All right, Spectrum Xtra on Radio 1 FM 90. We need to take a break now. When we return, we'll hear from Mr. Kasacha Henry, who is also here in studio. He also has another title there. We will be also looking at it because it seems he's jumping into the political fray ahead of the Kawempe North by-election. Stay tuned, Radio 1 FM 90, but keep your comments coming via the WhatsApp line 0703 090 090. Spectrum Xtra on Radio 1 FM 90, reviewing the major events of the week. Our focus now is on the Dr. Kizza Besigye situation. I have a panel of 4, and that includes Dr. James Tweheo, member of the NRM Central Executive Committee, and where he represents workers. He's also the coordinator of resident district commissioners in the Rwenzori sub-region. Mr. Benjamin Katana, NUP National Treasurer. He's also a lawyer. Ms. Perry Aritua, Executive Director, Women Democracy Network, Uganda Chapter. She's also a pundit on human rights and governance issues. And Mr. Henry Kasacha, he is the Executive Director, Dialogue and Democracy Training Center, but he's also the flag bearer of the Democratic Party in the Kawempe by-elections. Mr. Kasacha, I know you've been around most of these political actors, including FDC, other DP, all these other political parties, but most importantly, Dr. Kizza Besigye himself, and also you've been part of this country as the NRM is in power. You've listened to your colleagues around the table here. Let's hear your view on the Dr. Besigye situation.
No, I think Dr. Besigye has made the struggle his life. We must respect him for extending the fight and struggle for democracy. He was charged in a military court, which was wrong, and the courts pronounced themselves. And initially, the army made statements, public statements at various levels, trying to create an impression that they were going to disrespect the court. However, they had to give in. Giving in, they kept Dr. Besigye in prison. And Dr. Besigye chose to extend the struggle by going on a hunger strike. And this hunger strike has yielded, because I think Dr. Besigye was not against being charged, but he was against being charged in a court that was not a legitimate and lawful court. So today we hear that he has called off the hunger strike, reason being that he's now in a civil court of law. And I think that is what we have been pushing for. The law in this country is that everybody is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Regardless of what you think about him, you must bring the evidence to prove somebody is guilty. Now, we are seeing fresh charges now. Maybe there are charges that could only be heard in the court martial because of the nature of what it was, and which charges could not go through in a civil court because of the standards that have been set by the laws. So when you see some charges being dropped now and other charges coming on board, is that the DPP will have to look at the evidence before they charge. And these are the things that the Supreme Court was looking at when they were ruling on the court martial, because it was a court that could not provide natural justice. It was a court that could not understand or comprehend the standards of a fair trial. So any charge could go in a court martial and you can be convicted because there are no standards and the people running it are not the right people. It was not a competent court according to the Constitution of Uganda. So now that they are coming into the civil courts, the DPP has to ensure that the charges that they are on the charge sheet can be supported by evidence. So when you see some charges being dropped, don't think that they have dropped them in their heads. Maybe now the system demands that provide evidence. If you cannot provide evidence, you drop them. So I think that what we are seeing is a push back for democracy. And continuing to the NRM caucus and deciding on the court martial, I think that is another matter where they need to be, first of all, explained to the Supreme Court ruling. Because even the amendments that are going to be made in the UPDF Act can only be lawful if they comply with the Supreme Court ruling. And the army as it is, and the UPDF as it is, it cannot fulfill all those conditions that the judges pointed out of what constitutes a court of law. So we should not get worried about what they are trying to discuss. I think we are Ugandans, and democracy is winning gradually, that we are moving into the civil courts. And what we have to know is that the president was talking about Besigye's blackmail and principle, his health is because of that. But he is taking the hunger strike because of an illegal detention. And the president should not think that the detention now was legal. So Dr. Besigye chose to go for a hunger strike to protest his illegal detention. And now that he's in a civil court of law, he has called off the hunger strike. So I think what Dr. Besigye is giving us is that this struggle will require us to work a bit harder, to go an extra mile. I mean, even going on a hunger strike is a big thing. It's not very easy for so many to do, but it demonstrates that it can push people to the wall, and eventually they can give up. So it's a test for democracy, and it's also an encouragement that the struggle and where we are and what government is doing now, unless you have that resistance, unless you have leadership that can stand up to that test, Ugandans are going to begin accepting these things. And this is where we need to mobilize people to realize that, yes, to any way you can resist this erosion of our democratic space is when we stand up and we can be counted and we can push back this kind of dictatorial practices.
All right. Mr. Katana, one of the things that this Dr. Besigye situation has done for the opposition is bring you together. For instance, I was surprised to see certain leaders at the NUP headquarters, people that some people thought could not even step there. They were there. And the message there, for instance, on the day of the prayers from Martha Karua in Kenya was that you need to find a formula that unites the opposition together and probably front one presidential candidate. And actually, she offered to help using the Kenyan experience. This unity that you've galvanized during this particular Dr. Besigye situation, is it likely to live on longer? Is it what you're taking to the 2026 general elections? Mr. Katana.
I think two things. One is that there is a common mission and common cause. Number two is that the challenges that we face, not just as the opposition, but as the population, cut across. Because I have argued previously, and I will argue again today, that this talk of opposition, the political contestation is largely not about opposition, but it is about the power relations between the citizens and the people running the affairs of the state. That the citizen has largely been reduced to a subject akin to the colonial days or even the pre-colonial days, where the citizen has no say but lives at the mercy of the monarch.
Well, at the moment we have citizens saying so many things. There's even the right to vote.
If you give me a chance to build my argument.
Please. I was just giving you some information.
Yes, that is why, even when the citizens enjoy some rights, some people want to present it as a gift and a privilege from Museveni, the individual. Yet these are rights that they enjoy by virtue of being human beings. So the contestation is not about this party or that party. If anything, even people in NRM are as good as people in the opposition in as far as their rights as citizens are concerned. That is why, for example, Dr. Tweyo here or any other person in NRM today cannot dare express interest in repressing Museveni, because that now is a preserve of Museveni and his family. That is why the debate is about Museveni, Muhoozi, Obre. No. We are discussing the situation. We are discussing the situation.
Mr. Katana, let me set the record straight.
Yes.
It was in the wisdom of their political party, the NRM, that they took a resolution that as long as President Museveni is still alive, he will be their candidate. So,
which is evidence.
It's a decision taken by an organ of the party. There are so many other people.
Which resolution is evidence of the argument that I'm making? The power relations between the citizens and the people that are running the affairs of the state.
We shall re-echo that, my brother.
No, I can give you an example. In 2021,
let's allow him.
In 2021, when Amama was attempted to run, many NRM youth, Adam Ruzindana, Omodo, and the rest were arrested, like the opposition people are being arrested for allying with Mbabazi. But today, you have so many young people and old people allying with Mohoze, but nobody can touch them because they are running it on the model of a monarchy. But that is besides the debate of today. So the citizens, whether they belong to different political formations, whether they don't belong to any political organizations, they are in civil society, must realize the need to work together to tackle the challenges they face today. So the trial of Dr. Besigye that you're talking about, and the
unity that it has created within the opposition.
Doctor here is talking about the people being charged, but there's something called due process. Due process is fundamental. In fact, if any arrest, detention, arraignment, being arraigned in court and trial, fall short of satisfying the standards of due process, then the entire trial is invalid. Now, you abduct a person from Kenya, hold him incommunicado until the family, having received information, communicates that the man has been abducted from Kenya. You dump him in a military detention, which is not gazetted. From the military detention, you take him to a court-martial. From the court-martial, now because you have been caught stealing, you want to come out and say, no, I was not stealing, but I was mistaken that this phone was mine. That is what is happening. So the entire process shows clearly that this is not prosecution of a person suspected of committing a crime, but persecution of a political opponent in extreme abuse of processes and abuse of state institutions. Coming to the question of unity, it's very important, and I think it requires everyone in the opposition, but even outside the opposition, but who wants to see change, because what we are dealing with today does not affect the people who call themselves to be in the opposition. It affects almost even those that do not subject themselves. And I can give you an example. Today I have been in Kitaria visiting my friend Aaron Kizza. Aaron Kizza does not subscribe to any political party, but he's in jail on account of injustice. There are many young people who are arrested on petty charges in town and kept in jail on remand for 9 months. Some of them do not subscribe to any political party. So fighting injustice, the injustice in the country alone, the exclusion from the economy, the disadvantages that people in the business community go through, the high taxes, the high power tariffs, the high water tariffs, the extortion from enforcement agencies, all these factors do not discriminate people on the basis of which political party they subscribe to. The desire to have a renewed hope for the country. I like to give an example that in the 70s and 80s, majority of the people who ran away from Uganda were not people targeted by security agencies, but because of the situation pertaining at that time. Today there are so many young people and old people running out of the country because of loss of hope. So all these people must realize that for them to be able to have a new national consensus, that for them to be able to build a new Uganda that gives equal opportunity, that for them to be able to build a new Uganda that gives a conducive business environment, which will enable businesses to grow, which will attract meaningful investment, that will create employment opportunities, that they must work together. For them, they must know that for courts of law to be able to operate in the manner they should operate, for Parliament to be able to operate in the manner that it should operate, that they must start by creating a political environment in which leaders are accountable and in which citizens have their rights. So for them to be able to achieve that, they must work together against the common enemy of all those ideas that we have talked about. So it is important, and I believe and hope that the people who want change will have the wisdom to walk that path till the end.
Perry, quickly, you want to chip in? Anything you want to follow up?
Yeah, you see, the rule of law does not segregate. It's not about opposition, ruling party. It's about being treated equally and fairly. And that one, the state must be accountable to the citizens. two, that the laws must be clear, publicized, and applied equally. Okay? And that everyone who appears before the courts must be impartial in how they administer the law. So and you see, for me, the argument becomes so simplistic when people, say this is NRM, this is opposition. No, it's about Ugandans. We have a constitution which is clear on how our rights, on what our rights will be, how they will be administered, and the freedoms that we will enjoy. And that they have created this. You just read chapter 4, and that's, I think, the basic that we are demanding for as citizens. That respect what we agreed to, because that's what creates peace. If you decide to apply the law unequally, for instance, if the courts release someone and you arrest them, yet the courts have said let the person go, you're creating problems, because then people start thinking, oh, it's okay to break the law. Then some people start feeling like they are above the law, and that's why you find people acting with impunity. But if all of us know that these are the laws, when we break them, there will be justice, that the state will also be held accountable for infringing on those rights, then we're able to live normally.
All right.
So for me, it's not an argument of opposition, it's about citizens.
All right, a quick chip in, Mr. Kasacha.
I think the fundamental is what my brother Katana has said, that the citizens have been reduced to subjects. And when they are reduced to subjects, they lose the bigger picture. What you see as opposition fights are not necessarily trying to advance their citizenship status. When people are reduced and they think that their fundamental rights are a favor of someone, you will see some of those unprincipled fights, and those will make people lose the strategic objective. I think what we need as the opposition, much as we are in a multi-party political system, in legal terms, and the parties have been registered, the context under which people are operating has not yet allowed people to organize as political parties. And that makes it important that all political party leaders, especially in the opposition, but even in the NRM, because like you rightly said, nobody else can organize in the NRM unless they have some undocumented approval from the president. Nobody can go around the whole country. But we have only seen some people who are related to his family going around and organizing all these forms. So, and even why? Because we have been reduced to subjects. You even find people in the political system simply trying to show their allegiance to what somebody is organizing because he has the approval to organize. So what the opposition needs in this particular case, and this is why I also call upon them to think beyond these simple misunderstandings of fighting as subjects. The opposition needs to come together, and the opposition needs to be assisted. Why it has failed to come together is maybe they have not been assisted enough to see the bigger picture.
All right.
But that should not discourage people in the opposition. Those who believe in unity. We are in a country where we are in a situation or a context where we require collective leadership.
All right.
And that is the bottom line for
All right.
opposition unity.
Dr. Freyo, you wanted to rebuttal
Yeah.
what Mr. Katana said.
With the due respect to my brother and the sister here,
Closer to the mic.
this country and the leadership of this country takes serious concern to the rule of law. The very fact that the court pronounced itself saying, look, this is a mistake, and much as there were words here and there, but it was accepted. That's the fact
how
number
it should
one.
be.
That's the fact number one that we must recognize now. That is the reason why even the bill that was in Parliament, the EPDF Act, was withdrawn. That's the reason.
I think the reason it was withdrawn is to enable you to bring another tougher.
Not only that.
That's what people have been saying.
Not only that, no. Because of the ruling that came, and the ruling was done by the courts of law, competent courts of law.
Agreed.
And it was accepted. So if it was not accepted, then other actions and activities would have taken place. That's number one. The second issue is the fact that the opposition or my colleagues are putting simple attention to only one person is, in my view, a little bit myopic. We should put attention to all that are equally affected.
Well, there has been
And
a slogan,
no.
free all political prisoners.
No.
So you are admitting
Our
that
attention-
are you admitting that there are other political prisoners
Yes,
also in
they are.
jail? That's what you are admitting.
That's the fact we must admit. You see,
Okay.
once we don't look at things squarely and diligently, then we lose the whole thing. It is not only Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye who was subjected to the courts of law, to the
Court martial.
court martial. There are many others who were subjected to this. And this should be our argument in such a case. Say, look, if the court pronounces itself in this case, then let the other end move. If these people are genuinely guilty, or if they are true suspects and you have evidence towards that, then subject them to the civil courts. And the same people here should have not only argued that, but should even argue further that the civil courts should give themselves sufficient time to act on these matters, not to simply procrastinate. Actually, today, we had a very interesting scenario. There are people who were harassing others in the northern area, and they had guns. They are civilians. They had been taken to the civil courts 4 times, getting bail and moving out, until subsequently they were caught with the guns and sentenced, and now there's total peace. So sometimes we don't.
So you're
deal with
implying
that.
if they had been arrested with the guns, that's the evidence, and it's taken to the civil
Absolutely.
courts, they would have been set free? Is that what you're suggesting?
They
With
can-
evidence, concrete evidence?
Absolutely. They have that very same person who I can mention even by name here had been to court 4 times and had been given bond and would go back again and get on his military uniform, which was not entitled to, get his guns and get going.
Let him learn.
So,
Let him
in
learn.
this
Ghana were
case-
given bail in the general court martial.
In this case,
Mm.
yes, if that happened, then
Including Chirunda, this
we should not simply ignore that.
He was charged with killing a person in
So
somewhere.
should we blind ourselves
So,
to that?
everyone
And
gives
if you
bail.
are saying it can give bail, then why don't you say it cannot give even Kizza Besigye bail? Why do you think justice cannot prevail there if it prevailed for that Chirunda you are mentioning? So in this case, look here, let us be realistic. Let us say Uganda deserves the rule of law.
But that's what
Let
we
us
have
also
said.
say, in the situation, what could be done? What could have been done better? But also, even when there is rule of law, there are a number of issues you cannot blind yourself to. If you're a leader worth your salt, you must have a duty to protect your people, all your people, regardless of who they are, regardless of which party they subscribe to, and you should even able to stamp your foot down and say, look, this is wrong, this is right, and by the way, we should not simply say that even the courts of law cannot err. That is why there is always room for appeals. And in some cases of appeal, which these councils know very well, some have appealed and proved themselves that even some courts of law have erred. So in this case, we need to be very, very clear and transparent and say, look, let the law prevail and prevail for all, both the good, the bad, but also the time in which justice is dispensed should be the most important and critical factor, so that even when you are guilty, you are either convicted or set free, but in record time.
All right. Comments coming in. Tweheyo of UNATU is totally speaking differently from the one of NRM. Time is the best judge. We keep watching. We have another comment from Jacob Moyo, or Jacob listening in from Moyo in West Nile. Spectrum Xtra, let's pray that Sebugabe will one day say enough is enough. Like Lieutenant Edward dos Santos of Angola. That's a comment from Mawa Jacob, who is listening in from Moyo in West Nile. Spectrum Xtra, we are experiencing the false generosity of our leaders, as was on the colonial days. That is Lumbuye Lawrence listening in from Zigoti. Good evening, Spectrum Xtra. Let me thank my alumni at Masters of Human Rights, Makerere, Dr. Tweheyo. I agree with his submission and he's spot on. Have nothing useful to add. However, I would like to hear his view on an RDC in Kigezi region who made remarks on the release of Dr. Besigye and seems to be in hot soup. Then we have another comment from Okelo Patrick Bonyo listening in from Busega. If we are not comfortable with the democracy or rule of law, let NRM through its members of parliament declare a one-party state, or we do away with elections so that the public is aware of the democracy, but a one-man rule with his allies. We want to preach Western democracy, but we don't like it because power becomes sweet, yet the law says otherwise. So is the captain also going to be charged in civilian courts, or it was just a coincidence to be with Besigye? Then we have another comment from David. Is LSU1 regarded as a competent court? What are the differences between a court martial and the LSU1 court in relation to the justice system that we have in Uganda? Well, keep your comments coming. More via the WhatsApp line 0703 090 090, and the panelists in studio will respond to you. We're going to take a short break, and when we return, the panelists will actually respond to some of these comments before we switch our gears to look at another subtopic. Spectrum Extra will continue after this break. Thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Extra, review of the major events of the week. My name is Kenneth Lukwagandason, your host. My guest this evening, Dr. James Tweheyo, member of the Central Executive Committee of the NRM, fresh from the NRM Parliamentary Caucus meeting, which was in Entebbe. We'll hear what transpired there. We have Mr. Benjamin Katana. He's the National Treasurer at the National Unity Platform Party. I understand one of the questions the people were abducted were being asked is where the money for NUP actually comes from. Maybe you'll tell us. Also in studio, we have the voice of Ms. Perry Aritua. She's the Executive Director, Women Democracy Network, Uganda chapter. She's a lawyer. She's also a pundit on human rights and governance issues. Also in studio, Mr. Henry Kasacha, who is the Executive Director, Dialogue and Democracy Training Center. Is also the flag bearer of the Democratic Party in the forthcoming Kawempe North by-elections. Well, gentlemen and lady, you had the feedback that came in from the listeners. Who wants to go first? James?
Certainly, there are issues that we need to consider.
Maybe you can also tell us about the RDC in Chigezi sub-region, apparently who is in hot soup because of demanding for the release of Dr. Besigye.
I don't think that's the problem that the RDC has. Anybody can humanly request for that.
Mm.
And every other person would want Besigye released if he is innocent or if the courts deem it fit.
The release was about the medical ground for treatment to avoid the Muhammad Segirinya situation.
And even then, so why then isn't the minister who went there to see him and even accompanied him to the clinic, why isn't he in hot soup? It depends on the conduct of an individual. Yes. Because Honorable Yumus went there, he saw him.
On record,
yes.
On record, we are actually told Dr. Besigye declined. Dr. Besigye declined to see Dr. Bariomusi.
No. Dr. Bariomusi saw him personally.
That's what the lawyers actually say.
That is your argument, and that's the
no, I'm actually also telling you what the lawyers say.
But I can tell you without doubt that the Honorable Dr. Chris Bariomusi saw him. He can give a clear account of what it is and a clinical observation of him as a doctor. So I don't think really it is fair for anybody to say this other RDC is in hot soup, or which hot soup isn't he on his job working? Ask anybody. Isn't he in cover on his job working? So some people try to overstate things, which are, in my view, is not okay. But then, to sum it up, it is very, very healthy for any country to adhere to the rule of law. It is a good practice, but in some cases, the situations become a little difficult to manage in that case. And when the situation demands, then we don't want to move back to the previous times, regimes where people must fight. If you find people fighting, you say, let me call the police to come and look at you, or you can separate them if you can. So in this case,
depends what they are using to fight.
You can take the immediate action that you can take, or if anybody is sick, you try to resuscitate that person and subsequently get things done right. Here in Uganda, as you can see, there are situations that we should not blind our eyes from. If you can remember very, very well, this court martial, by the way, came into place in 1974. Yes.
As you wind up,
time.
as you wind up.
For emphasis.
In 1986, in 1974, actually 1960s. That's when it started. But then there have been moderations according to situations. And now that it has been announced by the court, competent court, there should be moderations to fit the situations.
All right.
By the way, laws are meant for the people.
Very quick.
And are meant for the country to make it better for the citizens to enjoy the freedoms as provided for in the Bill of Freedoms.
All right, your closing remarks on this particular topic, Mr. Katana?
The court martial, for clarity, nobody thinks the court martial should not exist. but the court martial is an internal institution of the army.
Disciplinary committee.
Disciplinary committee, like the Supreme Court had the occasion to pronounce itself. It should restrict itself to enforcing discipline in the army.
Yeah.
Because people sign up, they are not conscripted. And even at Radio 1 here, I'm sure they have their internal disciplinary mechanisms.
Yes.
But that does not host the jurisdiction of court. If an employee here commits a crime that requires them to be taken to court, they are taken to court. But you don't get an employee of another organization, or these people who operate shops outside, and you bring them here that you made noise in your shop, so we are subjecting you to the disciplinary rules of Radio 1. It is improper, it is unconstitutional in the case of Uganda.
What if that person chooses to come to Radio 1 and make the noise from here?
Then you take him to police, and he's handled the way other people who commit similar crimes are treated by police.
The reason why I'm using
law.
that, the reason why I'm using that argument, because we have been told a monopoly of the armed forces. Somebody finds
I
themselves.
think they are being disingenuous, because you see, even that provision, the Constitutional Court said this thing is ambiguous and therefore unconstitutional.
All right.
Because
Quickly.
the Constitution provides if you are going to be charged, the offense should be clear.
All right, Perry.
Otherwise, next time you will say that Kasacha's glasses look like the ones that Kuraije puts on. Then you take him to the general court martial.
My brother is giving you an example.
Very quickly, Perry.
If you had a gun, just a moment, briefly, kindly allow me this. If somebody had a gun, licensed or not licensed, and uses it wrongly, and if it was not only a gun, by the way, somebody can have even a grenade or anything else.
Understood.
That person is civilian. Where would you want that person to run to?
They are,
Still through the
taken
courts.
they are offensive
Yeah.
under the penal code.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That's why
In
treason
Uganda
is under the
or
penal
Uganda.
code.
Yes.
So some of
Are you suggesting that these competent judges, as appointed by President Yoweri
Kenneth.
Museveni, cannot try similar?
they
you
can.
know, issues?
I'm saying they can.
So why not bring
but
them beside?
in this case, there are some cases. that are-
You see, there are no exceptions.
All right.
You know, no. You see, Tuhehe is misleading listeners.
I think.
And in this case, by the way, let me tell you, do you know that there are some people using guns terrorize people on land?
Dr. Tuhehe,
Somebody may have his person
Those
on land.
offenses in the penal code.
So
very,
The penal
very
code.
on the floor.
The penal code. That's why the Supreme Court, in its ruling on 31st January, said trials of civilians in the military courts have often fallen short of domestic and international standards, thereby violating the right to a free trial, a fair trial rather. And you see, if you look at those who preside over the court martial, they don't have any legal qualification. And you
Some,
see,
not all.
most of them, and I think that's why our brother Aaron. In fact, I felt sorry for the lawyers appearing before the court martial,
All right.
because there's a whole process. There's a process
All right.
that the civil courts establish, so
All right.
that when you're presenting your case, are there facts? Is there evidence? What are your arguments?
All right.
That's how they make a decision.
All right.
But here, where you're not even given an opportunity to defend yourself.
All right.
You
Mr. Kasacha,
see,
very quickly.
Kenneth, if a general or a lieutenant general is in charge of the court martial, whether they are being advised by lawyers,
Judge, advocate.
whether they are being advised by lawyers or PhD holders, the judge is a person without the qualification to be a judge. You cannot say that I was advised by, you cannot get a Kenneth Lukwago to preside over a case being advised by Justice Owinyi-Dolo. If Justice Owinyi-Dolo is an advisor, the decision is of the judge. So that one is fundamental.
All
And
right.
the 1995 Constitution actually dealt with these issues. There are some rights that cannot be touched.
All right.
The right to a fair trial cannot be touched. And there are limits. So if the court martial has been instilling discipline and it has gone ahead and violated rights, and this is what the courts have said, even if they go into amending the UPDF Act, they cannot amend the UPDF Act and go below the standards of the Constitution.
As
And
per
that
the
is
ruling
the-
of the Supreme Court.
Exactly.
All right. And you have introduced this particular aspect, and Dr. Tuheyo is fresh from the NRM caucus, where they were discussing the possible amendments to the UPDF Act with a view of returning into force the military courts. Dr. Tuheyo, what has been agreed upon?
First of all, I want to put a disclaimer that I'm not the spokesperson of the caucus, but I will also say it without fear of any contradiction.
I'm officially making you the spokesperson of the caucus on this show.
I will not qualify that, but I will say without any fear of contradiction that we have had a good discussion on the issue of this UPDF Amendment Act, and particularly the issue that touches the General Court Martial and other subordinate courts. We are in agreement with the ruling of the court that there were some shortfalls, some gaps in this particular case. And we are suggesting that one, the appointments of the court marshals should look at the competence and qualifications of these UPDF officers, because the army was professionalized. We have competent lawyers with the legal and practicing certificates who can be appointed, and we are saying they should now be appointed, first of all, according to rank, but also according to their qualifications and competencies, but also in consultation with the Judicial Service Commission.
Okay.
We're in agreement that the courts, the court marshals, should be subordinate courts. And where there is, for example, in a division, there should be a division court martial, there should be a unit court martial, there should be a general court martial, and there should be appeals at all levels, from the unit to the division to the general court martial, and then subsequently to the court, either court of appeal or another court, where there is a satisfaction. But also, we are looking at other issues. There are surely some situations which you must consider and say, if somebody has an illegal gun, and somebody is found with an illegal gun with military uniform, and you are saying this person has been terrorizing people, you are saying these people went and killed others, went and worked even with some army personnel to rape, to ravage areas, we are saying these people should be accordingly charged within the court. Because
so you're going against the ruling of the Supreme Court, which clearly said civilians should not at any time be before the military court martial.
It depends on whether the civilian has been conscripted. For example, if the civilian willingly is conscripted to go and work in the barracks,
those are service offences.
No, yeah, exactly.
But even
Confusing
That they will be
themselves.
buried in.
No.
Another thing
person-
is that these fellows are digging the grave that they will be
Kenneth.
buried in.
There is no problem with that. The problem is we must keep sanity, both of the army, but of those who also hide behind the army to do heinous crimes. And that the court martial is not only disciplinary, it should also be preventive, but also should dispense justice in the true sense of it. And that's why we're insisting from now on, if the UPDF Act is passed, then the people who are in the court martial should be competent enough, because the other court said, look,
that's agreed. The competence of the people
should be
presiding
competent
over the
enough, should
court
be able
martial.
to dispense true justice in the true sense of
But
it.
if you
But
insist on
also,
civilians, then you are undoing the Supreme Court ruling.
We are very clear on that. We are there. If a civilian is conscripted,
What is
willingly,
conscription? What is
on his own
willingly
volition,
cannot be in the same
if
sentence
you go,
with
let me give you an
conscription.
example. If a civilian gets a gun and goes to steal, and is caught with a gun stealing, maybe working with a
No,
a
let's
veteran,
assume-
working with a veteran, should the veteran simply be taken to the court martial and the civilian left
The
alone?
veteran is no longer a
That's the
UPDF
whole
serving
thing.
military
That's the
officer.
whole
There's
thing.
an
After
offense
the
called
fact,
there's an
Right.
offense
So
in the
there-
law
so-
called
We don't
aggravated
want-
robbery.
There is what they call
Aggravated robbery.
robbery.
It's in the
Absolutely.
penal code.
So we should not simply blind ourselves to say people should misuse weapons
All right.
to
Mr.
the
Katana.
extent that they are protected by the law, and therefore because they think they should go there and get bail and get going, and we
Thank
say
you
the
very
country
much,
should go into
Kenneth.
anarchy.
Mr. Katana, isn't
The-
this what they say, new wine in old skin?
Yeah, but
Great.
the starting point is that to help, even with information, that the Supreme Court even mentioned that charging soldiers with offenses that are not service offenses, like raping is talking about, unless it is done as an act of war, or stealing, that charging them in the court martial is unconstitutional. But now, because they want to circumvent the ruling of the Supreme Court. Maybe they want to amend the Constitution and amend the UPDF Act. But for me, is what I mentioned earlier, that the court-martial for the last 5 years or so has been an effective tool for Museveni. And it is a tool that is not about to abandon in trying to persecute and subdue his opponents and his supporters. And I can give you an example that since 2021, from around 2020, we have had over 500 young people go through the court-martial. There is a group that has been facing the court-martial since 2021. We are now left with 9 people: Yasin Machete, Kato Umar, Karanzi, and the rest. The group was big, and they were approached because the state had no evidence against them. They were approached and said, "You plead guilty and we forgive you," after keeping them on remand for close to 4 years. Those who did not plead guilty, even before the ruling of the Supreme Court, there was no date for their trial. And they are still in the court-martial, which clearly shows you that this court-martial, the insistence on trying civilians in the court-martial, has got nothing to do with fighting crime. The crimes that Dr. Tweheyo here is mentioning can be charged in any courts. Today, they are charged, Dr. Besigye and Obedo Chare, with treason. So which offense is more grave than treason?
All right.
That you think you cannot charge in the civilian courts, you must take to their offenses to do with aggravated robbery, for example. People who go to steal with guns and other weapons. There are offenses of murder. There are so many offenses related to use of violence that can be handled through the courts. The other aspect is that the state apparatus has largely weakened, which is a very common thread in all dictatorships, that they are strong enough to keep power, but they are too weak to govern. They are too weak to provide services. The cases that Dr. Tweheyo is talking about here of a weak judiciary, where people who have committed crimes are taken to court and the matter is not handled properly, there are cases of inefficiency of the state that Museveni now presides over. It points to incompetence on the part of the chief executive, that he has failed. There's a lot of corruption in almost every sector, from the way people are arrested, the investigations are conducted, and the trial itself. So you cannot walk away from a problem you have created. And I can tell you that even in these courts that you want to take people to, there is a lot of corruption.
All right, Perry, what's your take? The NRM caucus taking that position that Tweheyo told us.
That's why when I began my submissions on the program, I said we have ratified the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, and we ratified it in 1986. About 10 months after the NRM government came into power. One of the reasons why you ratify a charter is you're supposed to domesticate. Uganda domesticated most of these provisions in the constitution. And one of their principles and guidelines on the right to a fair trial. And one of the principles is that the only purpose of military courts shall be to determine offenses of a purely military nature committed by military personnel. And Katana is right to say that these offenses that Tweheyo is referring to are in the penal code: aggravated robbery, murder. They are there. What is lacking at times is you find the police do not even have the resources to do their investigations, because you see courts rely on evidence. They look at facts and arguments. Now, if your evidence is not up to the standard that the laws have set, of course you'll find the case not being adjudicated properly, because you have to prosecute based on the evidence that you have. So we cannot cure a problem by just transferring it. We need to find out, why are there backlogs? Why is it that a number of criminal cases are not concluded as the public would have expected? At times it's just there's no evidence. Even getting witnesses to come and testify in court is a problem. So there are other weaknesses which I think we should not hide behind going to strengthen the UPD, the court martial. Let us address the issues facing the civil courts so that they're able to do their job. So for me, I think the conversation which Toheyo is the information he's giving us is like they hope that if they amended the UPDF Act to strengthen the court martial, for me it's already illegal. You can't try
why
civilians.
do you think they're insisting on civilians? Why do you?
And you see, and that's why Benjamin provided the names of some of these young people who are still languishing in jails. They don't know what they're being charged for. We had, when some of them came out of jail, people like Olivia Lutaya were saying, look, I had spent too much time in remand. I had no option. So for me, the persecution, we need to address it. And you see, we don't say these things because, it's just wrong. That for me is the bottom line.
Right,
that there is something that's right. This is wrong. Let us use the laws. Let people have their day. Because let's not keep people because they do not agree with our one's political opinion. It's unfair.
All right. Mr. Kasaja, your take on the proposals to return back the court martial, but you also had the key ingredients in the bill that's likely to be tabled in Parliament.
For the court martial to be a subordinate court, it must comply with the standards. And that's why some of the judges say this is not a subordinate court. And for the UPDF, thinks the court martial is a preserve of the UPDF. An idea that the court martial people are going to be vetted by the Judicial Service Commission cannot be stomached by these UPDF generals. The way they look at the court martial, it is their thing. They want to have so by mere allowing the court martial to be vetted by the Judicial Service Commission, it takes away that ideological thinking about the court martial. So this discussion shows you people who want something which they can no longer get.
But
under the current
this time around, it's before the MPs.
It's
the framers of the laws.
But if the MPs are helped to understand the ruling, for a court to be a subordinate court, it must comply with particular standards. The idea that the judges of the court martial are going to be vetted by the Judicial Service Commission cannot be stomached by the High Command, because the High Command and how it operates, it is the command. So nobody else can interfere with how the court martial is going to work as a subordinate court. So it's actually something that is, they are grudgingly agreeing that we have a legal framework and that the courts have solved this problem to take us back to the Constitution.
All right.
So any amendment that comes from the NRM caucus or Parliament, it must comply with the ruling.
All right. Thank you very much there, Mr. Kasacha. Now, let's shift our gears and go on to our next topic, and that is the issue of the NUP. NUP has been complaining about abductions. Apparently, some of their leaders were taken. But we have also received breaking news here, the police issuing a statement, and it reads as follows. Following reports of unauthorized military drills at the National Unity Platform Party headquarters in Kavule and their premises in Kamocha in Kampala City, the Uganda Police Force, in collaboration with other security agencies, have mounted a coordinated security operation. 2, our security personnel are currently conducting searches at the mentioned locations. Further updates on the outcomes of this operation will be provided in due course. Now, this communication is on the letterhead of the Uganda Police, but not signed by anybody. And I'll begin with you, Mr. Katana. What exactly is going on?
What is going on is what has been going on for a very long time. Militarization of politics and the continued reliance of security forces to play politics in favor of Museveni. And I've mentioned before that the challenge that we face is that there has been a fusion. You see, when you are dealing, for example, with a country like Uganda, there is something called the country that Uganda says it is these square kilometers, their boundaries. Then you talk about the state. The state you are talking about the infrastructure of the state, the apparatus, the courts of law, the parliament, the central bank,
the institutions.
the institution. Now, when you talk, then the nation and then the government. Now, there has been a fusion that the ruling party is the government. The ruling party is the state. And actually not the ruling party. The ruling party is also an individual. So the police, the army, the intelligence services, they all look at themselves as an extension of Museveni's political machinery. A few days ago, the chief of defense forces, who happens to be Museveni's son, made a declaration that he will make NUP whip. I even posted, I said this, you know, before the Holocaust, Hitler threatened to annihilate the Jews in Europe. And people took it for a threat. And what followed was the Holocaust. So you have threats by a person commanding the army that he's going to make people weep, that he's going to hang, that he's going to kill. So what you see, the raids, the abductions, are part of that pattern of the army being relied on to do politics, because the people that occupy the offices that run the state machinery, that are personified in General Museveni, have lost legitimacy to govern. So they must use coercion, like the governor, the governor Andrew Cohen. Andrew Cohen, because he had no legitimacy, he had to rely on the state machinery to enforce, to make sure that people toe the line. So that's what is happening. They are using intimidation, they are using the army to do all this. The statement that you're talking about, of course, they are just being disingenuous. This is not the first time that security agencies have conducted a raid on the party headquarters of NUP. Do you know anybody who has been tried in court and the trial has gone up to its conclusion arising from these searches? But these searches are done to disrupt. They are done to intimidate, because like I mentioned, we are dealing with a dictatorship. One of the things that enable a dictatorship to thrive is fear. And how do you build this? One of the bricks upon which dictatorships build is fear. So how do you entrench this fear? Make sure that people are abducted, make sure that people are detained without trial, make sure that people are tortured, make sure that everyone fears for their lives.
I'm sure you've
that
been
when
able...
you see a drone, you run away. That when that fear is what sustains the regime in power. So these raids are part of that pattern. It's the DNA of the regime that they must, and I can tell you that these abductions, the torture, the arrests in the last election were most common in Uganda. Previously, these have happened where the NRA and now NRM has been rejected previously. It has relied on violence in northern Uganda, in eastern Uganda, in Kasese, and now in Uganda. And this is not new in Uganda. In Ankole, Dr. Tweyo here is older than me because he was contesting when I was an O-level student. When Obote lost support and legitimacy, and I can give you examples of many people that disappeared. To date, they have not been, their families have not traced them. During Amin's time, many people disappeared. They have not been traced. Their families have not even had a chance to accord them decent burial. Now we are talking about Chibara Majon Bosco. We are talking about other people of that nature. These things which happened in other places are also happening here because the regime has lost support in Uganda. Because for a long time it survived on support here in Uganda. So there is nothing new in the raids at NUP. The only difference is that now this follows threats. But the threats now are coming from the Chief of Defense Forces. Previously, the threats have come from the Commander-in-Chief. So
the headline of this particular statement says police conduct search on illegal military training at the National Unity Platform premises. You are training a militia?
No, and that's what I was explaining. When you read the book by the late General Pecos Kutesa, it says when he was arrested by Aminu's soldiers at a roadblock, he was asked why he was putting on trousers and a white shirt. He said this is the uniform, meaning the uniform of the bank. And the soldiers beat him, tortured him because he had said uniform. For them, the word uniform was a preserve of the army. So the army of Museveni today, more than 40 years after Idi Amin, thinks that if you are organized, that is a military drill. It is a preserve of the military. If you put on a red overall, they say that is military because it is uniform. They think uniform is a preserve of the army. It's not.
All right.
What distinguishes military uniform is the insignia, the mark, which is gazetted. And if you can check in the National Gazette, the UPDF has designated marks, distinguishing marks. All these state institutions you see with uniforms, I'm told some of them have not gazetted, but the position of the law is that for it to be a preserve of an institution, it must be gazetted.
All right.
What is gazetted is the insignia, the mark, what you see, that thing that looks like the coat of arms and what have you. But you cannot say that a red overall, for example, is uniform of the UPDF.
All right.
That a beret that is uniform of UPDF. That if I'm standing in a certain fashion, that is a preserve of the UPDF. That is ridiculous.
All right, let's take a break now. When we return, I'll read something out for you from what I saw in the law, and you tell us whether you think NUP is acting within the law, but also why is it very important for you to dress the way you do? Stay tuned to Radio 1 FM 90. Spectrum Extra will continue after this. Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Extra live on Radio 1 FM 90, reviewing the major events of the week. Our topic of discussion right now is centered around the happenings at the NUP, that's the political party, where they are claiming that there are fresh abductions. Their people were taken. Some were returned today, including their national mobilizer, who is Freddie Nyanzi. They were also chairperson of the Electoral Management Committee, Mercy Walkamba, and one other member of that particular committee surfaced last night, saying that they had been held since they had gone for a burial on Tuesday last week, and they were released yesterday and dropped at Chireka Police. In studio today, I'm speaking to Dr. James Tweheyo, Mr. Henry Kasacha, Ms. Perry Aritua, and Mr. Benjamin Katana. And Mr. Benjamin Katana, before we went for break, I wanted to read out something for you, and you tell us whether NUP is doing something that is right or wrong. Because, first of all, we saw the spokesperson of the UPDF saying that if something jumps around like a duck, then it's a duck. You are training a military force, and therefore they will not allow you. And this surfaced on the day your president had a birthday at the party headquarters, surprise birthday by that group that you call the Foot Soldiers. And they, had a parade which was inspected by Robert Chagulanyi, the party president, and from there they actually said you had engaged in drilling. And they have been quoting section 45 of the Penal Code, unlawful drilling, which reads as follows: any person who, A, without the permission of the minister, trains or drills any other person to the use of arms or the practice of military exercises, movements or evolutions, is present at any meeting or assembly of persons held with the permission, without the permission of the minister, for the purpose of training or drilling any other person to the use of arms or the practice of military exercises, movements or evolutions, commits a felony and is liable on conviction to imprisonment of a term of 7 years. 2. Any person who at any meeting or assembly held without the permission of the minister is trained or drilled to the use of arms or the practice of military exercises, movements or evolutions, or who is present at any such meeting or assembly for the purpose of being so trained or drilled, commits an offense and is liable on conviction to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 5 years. So when I asked the military personnel what drilling actually means, they simply pointed to what happened at NUP. Making those lines and somebody coming and inspecting. Don't you think NUP has breached the law?
Why do you allowed to be misled by the UPDF spokesperson,
No,
who
I'm
is
just-
probably misled.
I've just read the penal
It's
code act.
ingenious.
Mm.
Because you have read the law itself,
Mm.
it's in English.
Mm.
They have talked about military exercise.
Mm.
They have talked about use of
Movement.
arms.
Mm.
So what is military exercise?
Military
Did you see
exercise.
anybody assembling a gun?
No, I didn't say
Did you see
anybody.
anybody on a shooting range?
No,
So what
Mm.
was the military exercise in what happened?
there was no
I
military.
think the thing is, and that's what I mentioned earlier.
There were
The
movements-
problem is
there
that
were
the-
movements
the
and
UPDF
evolutions.
has allowed it to become the extension of the political machinery,
Mm.
and they are always looking for what to hang on to deal with the NUP.
Mm.
You have seen in school. Have you seen in schools? I'm sure you have kids in schools.
Mm.
They even when they are raising the flag,
Mm.
they engage in some turning around.
Mm.
Have you seen any school kid being charged
Mm.
when they are raising the flag?
No.
So, and you have seen NRM supporters in NRM dress code doing exactly what those people were doing. Have you seen any of them being charged in court?
Maybe they have permission
We
from
have
the
seen
minister.
people. We have seen, and I've told you that my point is that what is done is
Mm.
not a military exercise.
What is
That
that?
is my point.
Mm.
That is not a military exercise.
Mm.
The military exercise, and the law even has talked about it.
Okay, that's a political party exercise.
You can call it whatever you want to call it, and I don't think the name is important. But
Mm.
what is important
Mm.
is for you to know, and using the example that that person gave you,
Mm.
that when you are dealing with the law, it's not about what it looks like. It's about what it is. This is a bottle of water.
Mm.
You cannot say it looks like a bottle of warage. What makes it water is that it's water, not what it looks like.
So the substance,
So
the content.
yes,
Mm.
because you see, the challenge is that some of those people have not transitioned. The UPDF
Mm.
is a creation of the law
Mm.
under the 1995 consensus,
Mm.
and they had an opportunity if they wanted to remain as NRA.
Mm.
But the UPDF as it is now is a creation of the law, and what UPDF is distinguished. It is written down. There is nothing that amounts to military exercise
Mm.
that was conducted at NUP.
In this case, when does the exercise become military?
I have given you examples.
He
When
said
you go to
if there are
Changwan,
guns
when you are
there,
dealing in Changwan,
there's a military range.
there is a
shooting
shooting
range.
range.
Mm.
You are taught how to assemble a gun.
Yeah,
You are
actually
taught how
that's
to
what
remove a
it
magazine.
means.
Those are military drills.
Yeah.
This was not a military drill.
No,
They are just
the law talks about the exercise, not the drill.
Well, it's
It's called
defining an
unlawful
exercise.
drilling. Eh?
Mm.
That's what the
Unlawful
law
drilling.
says.
That's what
Now,
it's talking about.
Which includes that, yes.
and now,
Yeah.
in practical sense, this is what the composition of a drill is. It consolidates soldiers into battle formations and familiarizes them with their
Exactly.
weapons.
Soldiers or anybody?
No,
soldiers.
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 Mm.
So
And the key word is familiarizes
And I
them
know,
with their
mm.
weapons.
Mm.
and I know Anderson and our listeners
Mm.
that General Kuraije and the entire UPDF know that what happened is not a military parade, it's not a military drill. But they think they can now use it as an excuse to curtail NUP.
Mm.
Just like they have used our way to curtail NUP previously. So
Not
they're
that,
just doing
not
politics.
that I have anything against your wear, but why is it important for you to dress the way you do?
For as long as your brand,
Mm. For
how you
instance,
have chosen
I've
to
never,
brand
I've
yourself.
never seen you branding like
for as
that.
long as how you have chosen to brand yourself
Mm.
does not offend any law, you are at liberty to brand yourself in a manner that you want.
Mm.
For example, I can choose to put on glasses. You will not ask me why are you putting on glasses. If we allow someone without even basing on any law to say that you should not put on a red shirt, tomorrow they will say don't put on shoes. The shoes are a preserve of NRM. So, so we shouldn't. If they want to do it, they can do it
Mm.
because they have chosen to be a dictatorship. But they should not hide behind provisions of the law.
Mm.
There is no law that NUP breached. There is in choosing what to wear. There is no law that NUP has breached in what now they are calling a military parade.
Mm.
But they are just hiding behind those provisions. They are always looking for a way. What can we rely on to cripple not just NUP, but all forces that they think are emerging and the citizens are coalescing around.
Perry, your take on this? Perry?
Oh,
Yeah.
I was still.
Hey.
All right.
Running through the
The
road.
key-
No, I was
the
still just
kidnaps
trying to
are-
get
Mm.
the definition of the military drill,
And
and I think the element of weapons is important in the definition. So, of course, and that's why the law is interesting. Is that even when you say something, you have to prove it. You have to discuss the elements.
Just
What
get
does
it right
this
and run away with it.
exactly like? What does this constitute? You don't just say this is this. You have to prove that this comprised A, B, C, D, so it amounts to this particular offense. So for me, that is my comment in that regard.
You
That-
yield-
that
you
you
yield your
have to
time.
prove.
Mm.
I have yielded my time in this regard. But for any organization, you're allowed to brand yourself as long as it does not break the law. And that's why you're dressed like as you're dressed today in a T-shirt. And I asked you, is that the brand of Radio 1? It could be your brand, you know. As long as you do not contravene the law as is. Yeah, now who are we to start saying we think? Because the law doesn't work according to what you think.
All right.
It must be stated. Then you say you broke this section of the law.
Right, but let me pick your brain maybe on this particular issue of alleged kidnaps. We had this situation before, during, and after the 2021 general elections. Now we are seeing it now. What does this mean for the country, the political space, as we head to the 2026 general elections?
I mean, like what we saw in the previous elections, it creates fear. And you see what that does, it then makes people not participate. And yet you want legitimacy through, at times you want legitimacy through an election. And when you do things that keep people away from the election, like if people think, oh, if I'm found at this time, I'll be disappeared, you end up losing. And numbers matter in any election. You know, so if you have only 40% of a population that is turning up to vote, yet you have many who are registered, your legitimacy is also questionable. And that's why it's unfortunate. We should not even be having disappearances because it's against the law. Our constitution is clear. And for Uganda, if we just decided we are going to use our laws as they are, we would go a long way. Why disappear a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, an old man now like these ones who have been arrested? Those are old people. I mean, for me, it doesn't.
The war claimants.
For me, I think it works against us, not only internally but internationally.
Right.
You see, unfortunately, at times when we see these things, people think, oh, it's only Ugandan. But these days, the social media, anything that happens here also then informs decisions, even of investors. So it has other effects. It's not only the political, but the economic effect. Because you see, you want to ensure that the laws work. Now, so that if I invested in Uganda and I got into trouble, I would be certain that there is a rule of law. This is how things will work. But if I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this country, things don't work as they are, I would rather go to another country where I'm confident that if things went another way, I would use the courts to deliver justice.
Well, the only people that Perry is talking about is a group of war claimants apparently from eastern Uganda who had come to meet the NUP party president. They were unfortunately found around that place. Apparently they were in their bus heading back home. They were rounded up and taken to Wandegea police station. Let's hear from Dr. James Tweheyo. What is it that you're looking for from the NUP headquarters?
I don't think there is anything much that we should be looking for from the NUP headquarters.
You saw the
What we should be
statement
looking
of the
for-
police.
What we should be looking for is sanity. And sanity should not be a preserve of either NUP or NRM or whichever. This country needs sanity. And by the way, you know, intimidation is not only done by the NRM or whichever. Intimidation is done by all, including, and not exceptionally, including my brothers and sisters from NUP, National Unity Platform.
Are you sure?
Yes, I am very sure, because in some cases, when you act in a way that threatens the existence of others, then surely it is not right. It doesn't matter whether you are dressed in red or in yellow, it is not proper.
When did you
It is
see
not
anyone
right.
from NUP threatening somebody, really?
Oh no, we have it even here on record. You can see it. I can even play it for you. This
Unfortunately, we may not have time
unfortunately,
to.
we may not have time for that. So it is not right.
What did you see?
It is not right the fellow was saying, look, when you get anybody in yellow, just cut off his throat. It is not proper.
And you're very sure they speak for NUP?
If somebody is dressed in the regalia,
There's something called evidence, because they'll ask you, that's a member, because you see, to become a member, I don't know, Katana, what your conditions are.
Now you're going to the semantics of the law.
No, you have to do that, otherwise then you'll arrest anyone.
You may presume that somebody is not a registered member, but if he poses in your case and you don't disown him or her, then it means you are actually fronting that person.
So in other words, you're saying the NUP should own that person because the person was putting on their uniform.
Own or disown.
They are putting on their uniform, which you think NUP
These
should
people
not be using.
Own. No, not about uniform, by the way. Uniform is okay. It is very healthy.
Okay.
It is very fine. The problem is in the words, in the statement somebody makes. And let them either own or disown. If they disown, let them say, that one is not ours. He's not speaking for us, and what he's saying is not right. If he is their own, then they should take responsibility also to discipline and control such conduct. And this is what I say. Even in our own party, if anybody misbehaves and wants to go beyond the limits of what the law provides, that person should be controlled and disciplined. That's why there are disciplinary committees. That's why there are disciplinary...
examples of those that have been disciplined.
That's why there are disciplinary mechanisms in all institutions, including the parties. And this is my take. Let there be sanity. If the police comes there, like they have come there in this case, they have made it clear. I'm happy that they have come out and said, look, we are there for this purpose, and when we finish this, we shall get away. If we find any evidence to this effect, we shall take it to the laws, and the laws will provide for what action should be taken. This should be the right thing to do. And I don't think there is any worry, in my view, if you were innocent. Even if they came to search my house, I would say, look, it is open, you search, get what you want, and get away.
Legally?
Oh, yes, legally.
Following the laid down procedure.
Now,
like you come with a search warrant.
Like now, they have put it very clear. So in this
After
case,
they have conducted, when the raid is ongoing.
when was the statement made? That's the whole question.
The statement just came out a few minutes ago.
But when was it written?
No,
So you are one of the leaders of the party. You are here free with me. We are talking. We are doing whatever is being done. I hope your past has not been purged, and because he's the treasurer. Maybe
well, you don't know what is in his office.
We are not like NRM people who keep money in sacks.
Mr. Kasacha, your reading of this situation as we head into the next election. In fact, some of the people were released who came out, for instance, Marcin Alukamba, at a press conference and said one of the things the security operative told her that Kawempe North by-elections is not going to be a joke. This is a place where you're going to be, Mr. Kasacha.
Why are you threatening?
No, I'm not threatening. I'm just recounting what I heard from the press conference.
No, that one I'm going to win it because these people are now weak.
No, I'm going to win that race.
But if we don't win, then one of them will win.
Or you'll say they
I'm
cheated
going to
you.
win that race.
You're going to win.
I'm going to win Kawempe North parliamentary seat because I think that the people will vote for me. I'll explain to them. But going to the issues, intimidation is one of the tools people use in our politics, and it has been used to instill fear. And we want to look at the faith and the honesty of what the police has said. Just 2 days ago, the CDF says you are going to cry, you're going to weep. A parade took place, or a military drill took place. They saw it. They know people who were there. The due process in the spirit of Section 45 of the Penal Code would be to arrest those people and take them to a police station and charge them for unlawful drilling. That would be the due process. Now, the current search is not in the spirit of Section 45. Though Section 45 is used as a pretext of saying the law says you should not conduct a military drill. The current search is sending a fear signal across the whole country and all the NUP supporters that now even putting on an overall is going to be a drill, walking like this is going to be a drill. So it has a far-reaching consequence on the supporters. Because if you're searching if it's a military drill,
Mm.
and then you are searching an office, really a drill taking place in an office, not in the premises.
Mm.
Because you cordon off the premises and begin searching. You are searching the offices for military drills when there are no people there.
Mm.
So I want to say that number one is that intimidation in our politics should be discouraged by anybody.
Mm.
Number two, if people are intimidating, they should be charged across board. Because if you say the NUP supporters are intimidating people, there are people in the NRM or subscribers of the NRM who are also on record of intimidating Ugandans. Some of them have also vowed even to cut people, and they are very proud about it. And we have not seen the action on that. So the far-reaching consequence of this operation is that it is going to send a clear signal.
Mm.
But we are also having a situation where we are having an increasing tendency of adversarial politics. And when you're going into an election season in this kind of situation, you are not likely to have a peaceful election. And people will not believe that this statement is an honest statement. They will not believe that, yes, okay, you have quoted Section 45, but they will not believe it because they see other activities, they see other statements that are actually also fueling violence. So I think that what we are seeing now at the NUP office and this statement is going to have a far-reaching implication of sending a fear signal of anybody who is associated with this organization.
All right.
And it could also disorganize the activities of the party and disorient the party.
All right.
Because now you're moving into a defensive position of whether this is a drill, not a drill, what is a drill, and that's the court of law to interpret that.
All right, we have comments coming in. Richard writes in and says, do you recall crime preventers who later became crime promoters did military drills without any stoppages from police or military? They later heightened crime and got disbanded. How come no arrests were made on the propagators? These young men at NUP are innocent, and harassing them is only casting the country to a bad tomorrow, because those young people are the tomorrow of Uganda. It's inevitable. You may kill and arrest them, but they have fields, they have friends and relatives who will keep waiting to carry out revenge. Then we have another comment. What Museveni has done will demand daily public holiday upon his departure. Still talking about the death of late Bishop Janan Luwum. Then we have another comment here from Charles, CEO, Third Eye Security Consults Uganda Limited, who said the opposition tactics are appalling and it's high time somebody expose their blackmailing strategies. Labeling law enforcement officers as goons, arrests, or abductors, and the government as a junta or dictatorship is a deliberate attempt to manipulate public opinion. Their hypocrisy is staggering. They demand freedom to abuse others online, yet expecting immunity from accountability. They cry foul when arrested, claiming abduction, and use this narrative to further their blackmail to President Yoweri Museveni. President Yoweri Museveni has rightly called out this unprincipled blackmail. Seriously, in what country do we see a state tolerating paramilitary operations? And who is in their right mind defends this anomaly? Are some opposition groups behind those militias preparing to counter legitimate security forces? If so, are they prepared to face the consequences? As the saying goes, he who wishes it to rain must prepare himself to walk in the mud. It's time for transparency and honest conversation. That's Charles, CEO, Third Eye Security Consults Uganda Limited. Then we have another comment from Okello Patrick Bonyo from Busega. When the armed forces joined politics while in office and mastered what chief wants here, and that was the beginning of the downfall of rule of law. I saw no parading young men as security officers, and I just sympathize because many will be arrested or even killed. Then we have another person writing in. It's called Tom. He says, but the NRM caucus is funny. No amount of amending of the UPDF Act can change the ruling of the Supreme Court. Well, those are some of the comments that have come in at around this time, so I'll give each one of you an opportunity to make a closing remark, and I want to begin with you, Mr. Benjamin Katana, as we come towards the end of this show.
No, the starting point really, as I make my concluding remarks, is that Uganda has not just started. We have a history. And when the people of Uganda came together to make a constitution in 1995, they were mindful of this history. And that's why they said in the preamble, recording our history. And they talked about the uncheckered history, the violence and what have you. it's sad that to date we are still grappling with the same situations. And I think the bigger lesson to the people in power is to know that power is transient. It's not permanent. And that if instability, especially the supporters of NRM, to know, and I see some of them bragging in those comments, instability and insecurity cannot discriminate. We have had a situation in this country where army officers and policemen look for where to hide their uniform when they are running into exile. And they cannot find where to hide it.
All right.
And such a time can come back. So while they exercise power, intimidation, and move around that like the world belongs to them, they should know that the result is tomorrow.
All
It
right.
may not be about them, but
All
it
right.
may be about their children and grandchildren. This is our country for us to build together, but not to kill each other.
Very quickly, we have a comment coming in from Nick who says, Matthew Kanyamunyu shot Ojok dead with a firearm. He was tried in a civilian court, not the military kangaroo court. Jamil Mkuru reigned terror in Kasese and Kampala. He's before the International Crimes Division, not the kangaroo court. These no people were being drilled to sing and dance for the birthday of their party president. Is singing and dancing a preserve of the army? If this is not ridiculous, irresponsible, contradictory, and disingenuous, then what it is? Then I'll hear from you, Kasacha, your closing remarks very quickly in a few seconds.
I think we need to work together to build our democracy. And we need to avoid fear and intimidation as a tool of power. We need to build a culture of democracy, which is what we are struggling with. And I think it is not going to be easy, but it will require courage on part of all political leaders and even our friends
All right.
in the government not to use the state institutions.
Mr. Tweheyo, very quickly in a few seconds. Closing
Very
remarks.
quickly, number one, the UPDF Act and others must comply with the ruling.
Okay.
That one is agreeable, and
All right.
that's what must be done. Number two, the discipline should prevail, not only for the new people, but also for any other person who lives in the country. And certainly, lastly, the laws should be supreme.
Perry, very
and
quickly in a few
everybody
seconds.
should be subject to the laws of this country.
Perry, very quickly.
For me, it's just chapter 4 of our constitution is clear. Let's try and do right by others. You know, do unto others as you would want done unto you.
All right.
Thank you.
With that, we come to the end of Spectrum Extra. Thank you very much, dear listeners, for tuning in, and the panelists for actually turning up today.